Good evening, everybody. It is 6 p.m. Central. You're watching OrbitCon, and this is the panel on the secular woman line. Who's running this show anyway? I will be accepting questions and relaying them to the participants. If you go to the-orbit.net, click on the OrbitCon banner and scroll down to the 6 p.m. slot, click through that, and you can enter your questions as comments on that blog post. I'll be watching there. Take it away.
Thank you, Jason. We did suggest that Jason hang around in our panel and repeat all of the lines and points that we make. Therefore, people would actually listen to him. He can have the actual titled role of He Peter. But hello, pardon me. I'm Monette Richards. I'm the current president of Secular Woman. In 2012, 4 women took a look at the secular movement and realized that there was way lacking in representation of women. So they pulled together and they founded an organization, Secular Woman, with a vision of the future in which women without supernatural beliefs have the opportunities and resources they need to participate openly and confidently as respected voices of leadership in the secular community and every aspect of American society. Now, this was a time in the movement when Elevator Gate, followed by Dear Muslima, had opened the doors to rampant harassment of women. It was a time when the mere thought of codes of conduct at conferences and meetings was being pushed back against with vehemence. It was a time when an entire forum was created simply to give harassers a place to work against those fighting for change. This was also a time when the Reason Rally and Women in Secularism were happening. The movement was riding a high of growth, and the people getting the benefit of that growth were mostly men. It was a time when organizers were saying, "Where are the women?" and hearing, "Oh, women are just more spiritual," as an answer. This was also during the war on women, making us fight on multiple fronts against Republicans trying to take our rights away and against harassers in the secular movement and for equal representation on stages and on boards. So these women saw space mostly being denied to women and created an organization to help us work against that. And I am deeply honored to be able to be one of the people leading this organization. And with me is another one, also on the board of Secular Woman, Sam Faruqi. And Sam, if you could give me an idea of what sparks your secularism, your feminism, and your activism.
Can you repeat the question real quick?
Sure. Give me an idea of what sparks your secularism, your feminism, and your activism.
So what sparks all of those things is basically intertwined for me. They've never really existed separately. The reason I initially stopped, it wasn't just that I stopped believing in God. It was that I was not willing to worship a God that did all of these shitty things, particularly for someone who was in all of these positions that I was in. So I guess basically social justice preceded atheism for me. Feminism preceded atheism for me. Even though like I was kind of ambivalent about the belief part, the worship part is way more central to how I feel about atheism and even religion in general.
Very cool. Also, pardon me, also with us is Valerie Aurora. Can you tell me about the same thing? What sparks your secularism, feminism, and activism?
I loved the way that Sam put it. I never thought of it that way, but it's so true. For me, the experience of growing up in a evangelical Christian household was very clearly wrong because of the patriarchy involved. That was extremely obvious to me in the way I was growing up. So for me, getting to a place where I was valued and valuable meant leaving that first church I was engaged with. And then from then on, I learned more and got more information. So they're very mixed up together for me. Over time, I have come to realize that not all forms of spirituality are necessarily harmful to women or other groups of people. So I'm a little less militant than I used to be, but social justice is absolutely the founding basis of my atheism.
Hashtag not all spirituality.
Yes.
Okay, so Valerie, give us a little bit of your background, who you are, where you came from, how you ended up on this panel, kind of thing.
Sure. Yeah, so I began in my computer science career. I at one point realized that I was the only woman in the world working in my very specific field publicly at the time. So it was the Linux kernel development, and I started learning more about feminism as researched, as a thing that people were building up education about and sharing in the world, instead of just like a simple belief, oh, women should have the same things. So I did that work as an activist for quite some time, and then I started the Ada Initiative with my co-founder, Mary Gardner, and we quickly found it was about open technology and culture and open source software, Wikipedia, things like that. And we quickly found that there was actually a quite large overlap with the skeptic and atheist community, in that there's a lot of similarity of the issues facing the communities, and things like who's getting credit, is there harassment going on, do we need a code of conduct? So I ended up going to conferences and working with a lot of people who are secularists and atheists. So thank you for inviting me to join, Renette.
Yeah, we participated. I had talked previously in a different panel about participating in the Ally workshop with you, as well as the imposter syndrome, and and going to Ada Camp, which was just that was pretty awesome. We're glad you're here. Sam, can you give a little bit of background of who you are, how you ended up where you are, after you unmute?
As I was saying before I unmuted myself, oh gosh, there's a lot. I guess where I could say it began was when I was born in in Pakistan, which is, it's all but a theocracy at this point. So I've always been very aware of just the religious aspects of society. So when I got to the US, it was a totally different perspective. I just realized it's not the question you were asking.
You can answer whatever question you want to answer. So that's fine.
Right. Okay. I mean, one of the first organizations that I got involved with when I got to college, at least, even though I'd been an atheist since I was like 14, was Secular Student Alliance. That there's a lot of history there, but I used to be the campus organizer for that, so I have worked in the movement for a while, and even besides that, I've volunteered for other organizations before I ever got to SSA, including interning with CFI and AHA, and just, generally getting involved wherever I could before that. Yeah, I think that's a good summation of my involvement in the secular community.
That's an awesome summation. So what we're here to talk about on this panel is who represents and moves this secular movement. In 2014, Secular Woman gathered information available about the staff and board members of the national organizations, all the public information, and tallied that information up. And Kim Rapier, one of the founders of Secular Woman, couldn't be on this panel today because she had a conflict. But I wanted to kind of give her words a little bit about what happened when we shared this information the first time. So she says, years ago, when Secular Woman was young, this project began with a simple idea: gather data so that we have valid information on which to rely. Seemed like one reasonable place to begin to understand atheist, secular, skeptic organizations in relation to gender. There are other ways we might have started, but this one was based on gathering publicly available information via a limited number of websites. We didn't want to call the organizations. Instead, we wanted to understand what they were portraying to the public. Who was on the board? Who has leadership positions within the organization? And what is the percentage of women? This seemed like a manageable, informative, and valuable project for Secular Woman, their members, community members, and community organization leadership. How can you effectively grow if you don't understand where you are? Basic. So I gathered the information, made a spreadsheet, did some calculations to help understand what the raw data was saying, wrote a report based on the findings, and hit publish. The hope was the people in the community and those in leadership positions would pay attention to the findings, care, and work to make changes as needed. What could go wrong, right? Wow. Instead of seeing this as informative and interesting, too many saw it as some sort of irrational conspiracy to, I don't know, expose the truth. Skeptics not wanting data on which to form opinions, calling me and secular women all sorts of names, assuming nefariousness, and generally being alt-right, low information jerks. So emotional. I haven't seen the most recent results, which are being released in this panel, but I am hopeful, unrealistically, that changes have been made, women are better represented, and humanist feminists are taking over the atheist community and globally, you know, the first steps to world domination. So that's all we did was tally the numbers in 2014, just off the national organization websites. And for some reason, this was seen as an attack on white men, I guess, or something. So we decided for this panel that we would kind of do the same thing. Sam, can you give us an idea of what you did? And we will release the numbers that we have on our website after the panel will publish everything. But if you can give us an idea of what you did to collate the data that we're going to be talking about today after you unmute yourself.
So the way I got the data together was very similar to how we've done in the past, where we went on to their websites and looked at what the people they publicly reported as their employees, and used those figures, whether on the staff or board or other advisory councils, and just noted those numbers. There were a few organizations who did not have those their staff or board on their websites, and I contacted them personally to get those numbers from them. There are a couple of organizations that I think did not respond, at least one, or that we weren't able to contact, and those numbers are still at large. But aside from that, we have at least the public numbers that have been reported on their websites, with which we, then did the analysis where we just tracked how many female and male, and at this point non-binary also, members of staff and boards had been added or subtracted from the count, and just track the changes over since the last time we did it. And then I went back and did track the changes from the count before that as well.
Right, because there was also, they did the numbers for 2013 and the numbers for 2014.
Right.
Yeah. Valerie, can you give us kind of an idea of why this is important information? What it might tell us?
Sure. Yeah. There's sort of this. There's sort of a gut feeling that people have of that we should have people who are representing our community in leadership, and having that not just representation, but having power given to a variety of people. And in this particular case, we're looking at gender. But there's actually some really good research out there that talks very specifically about what those benefits are. One of the examples is there's an article from Harvard Business Review that goes over what happened with the when Norway made a rule that all the boards of directors of all Norwegian companies needed to be at least 40% women. So they went in and studied the effects of that, and there's a bunch of amazing things that happen that are basically the outsider, coming from two places. The outsider effect, like there's someone who's not already there, who's not already immersed in how we do things and doesn't think to question. Someone coming in who's new is saying like, hey, why are we doing this? I think the other place it's coming from too is, as I discussed with the rest of the panel, if you're a member of a marginalized group, you're not used to getting away with things. You're used to having to follow the rules exactly and do things extremely well, and you'll still get people telling you you're doing the wrong things. Whereas if you're a member of, if you're an extremely privileged person, you're used to cutting corners and getting away with outrageous things. But the very specific things they found were you have better dialogue, you have better decision making, You're better at risk mitigation and crisis management. There's a good, better balance between taking risks and avoiding risks. There's the board is better at giving advice to and guidance to the management. There's a lot of positive changes in the boardroom culture. People just like it better. They like having board meetings with more women in them. The board work is more orderly and systematic, and there's men behave better. So there's a bunch more details in that thing, but the research shows that yes, actually organizations perform better at their functions when they have more women involved in leadership.
Which kind of makes sense. I think I mean, not just organizations, businesses fare better, don't they, when they have a better representation of women on their boards and in their management. So let's take a look at actually what the numbers do show us. Sam, did you see anything particularly that struck you when you tallied up the numbers? Changes, big changes, or anything else that jumped out at you?
So there have been a few big changes. Overall, organizations have gotten smaller. This was most likely because the movement itself has gotten a little bit, it slowed down somewhat since 2013-14. Arguably, 2012 was one of the biggest years for the movement, and since then, as funding's gotten smaller, and this is actually statistically the case, the funding has gotten smaller for organizations in the secular movement, and so they have less staff. With organizations that I've worked for in the past, there have been, I guess, waves of like firing to accommodate the movement getting smaller as well. At the same time, the statistics for women versus men being in staff or board positions haven't really changed very much, and they weren't great to begin with. So we haven't really made much progress in that regard.
Yeah, in fact, I think as far as board goes, we went down slightly for representation. And let's see, we had 72 male board members and 53 female board members this year, which there were some organizations, and actually I will point out that we did not add our board in there because I think that would have skewed the numbers a bit more, since we're one of the very few organizations that have an entire female board.
Right.
Us and Black non-believers are all female boards. They're the only ones. But yeah, it's an interesting look to see. We have 57% of board members are male, yet 62% of staff members are female. To the imbalance in that. Valerie, are you? Yeah, did you already take your mic off? You knew it was coming. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. There's a great article about something called the gender binary is fractal, basically. So fractal is something that looks similar at one size, and you zoom in and it looks very similar again, and you zoom in again. The gender binary says like men do these things and women do these things, and obviously it leaves out anyone who's not men or women. So that's one aspect. But the next thing is that as you zoom into anything that men are supposed to do or anything that women are supposed to do, you'll find within that area that it's still split up again into men are supposed to do this and women are supposed to do this. So you see this in women-dominated professions all the time, where you have, say, nursing is women-dominated. As you go up the hierarchy within nursing, it becomes more and more male-dominated as time goes, as you go up the hierarchy, because leadership is coded as male in the gender binary. So, and that's somewhat confusing for people who've only ever worked in male-dominated industries, and they think that it's an effect of whoever's the dominant group within the industry. in terms of numbers, not in terms of who actually has power. But whenever, because of the gender binary and its fractal nature, every time you get closer to power, you're going to get more male.
Education is another very good example of that. All the teachers are female and all the administrators are male because they get fast-tracked to the top. Yeah. I love that concept, though, of it being fractal. That's a very cool way of putting that. So, you know, I want to, in a time of our movement, in the time of Me Too, and in the aftermath of Krauss's sexual harassment being brought to light, and David Silverman, president of American Atheists, just being fired over more allegations of sexual harassment and sexual assault. Why this representation really makes a difference. Secular Coalition for America has a board of 8 men and 2 women. And they just hosted, well, it was supposed to be like a secular leadership summit, which happens every year, and Secular Women's been a part of for the last 5 years. And then Secular Coalition of America and one of the board members had decided that it was going to just be a members-only meeting, and Secular Woman was basically uninvited. And when you see that representation of 8 men on the board, and their advisory board is 14 men and 3 women, and you kind of have to wonder if there is a correlation between, you know, not wanting those uppity women to be in their meetings anymore, telling us things that we don't want to hear. But yeah, back to Me Too and Krauss and Silverman and this representation. Sam, would you have anything that you would like to talk about that of you know, the representation and what we're seeing here?
Of course I do, Monette.
That's why you're on this panel.
So essentially, part of why, at least, I mean, part of why it's so easy for predatory men to be so prominent, like particularly in this movement, but also in other male-dominated movements, even though there are a lot of women who want to be in here, who find themselves having an affinity to secular causes. It's, oh geez, I just lost my train of thought entirely. Okay, I remember now. So essentially, you have women being a lot of the staff, but all the leadership positions that are higher up in administration and such being offered and given to men, essentially, and that puts an effective like hierarchy where the women are doing the grunt work all the time in the background, and men are put in a position, regardless of anything else, where they are able to exploit women. I think part of the solution to this has to be that not just that you know, get women into you know, the higher positions, but also you have men being willing to do some of the, you know, the backbreaking work of the movement.
Valerie, you wrote a piece, I think, that ties in with this a bit ago. The Al Capone effect. Is that?
Yeah. Actually, there's 2 pieces: the Al Capone theory of sexual harassment, and there's a companion piece called "No More Rock Stars."
Right. Yeah, that
those were co-written with Lee Honeywell and Mary Gardner, and I'm scrupulous about giving credit because that's one of the things we recommend. The first part is to recognize the Al Capone theory of sexual harassment. Says, hey, it turns out if somebody is sexually harassing or assaulting people, they are probably also doing a bad job. They're probably embezzling money in some form. They're probably lying on their expense reports. They're probably stealing credit from other people, whether through direct plagiarization or through jumping on bandwagons and joining in the credit for work that they didn't do. Which, if you think about it, boy, that does sound like a lot of leaders that you've known or that you see in the news. So that's one reason to be extremely concerned about sexual harassment and assault. The other side of that theory is that if you can't get people to take the sexual harassment and assault seriously, you can probably get them to take all of the other things seriously as well. But the No More Rock Stars is more of the like, how do you prevent this? And what do you do when it happens, other than trying to find other things that they've done wrong? And No More Rock Stars is about creating situations in which you have hierarchy exists only to coordinate people together. It doesn't exist in order to do things like there's no unnecessary gatekeeping is part of what I would say. So what you're seeing is what Sam was describing is people aiming to get into positions of power so that they have control over other people, their futures, whether they get exposure to the rest of the movement, whether they can fulfill their internal desire to do this work. And so what we say with the No More Rock Stars is, here's how to create a culture and a structure in your organization which is not attractive to rock stars and doesn't give them that power. So it's a variety of things like getting rid of unnecessary gatekeeping, being extremely scrupulous about giving credit correctly, making it easy for victims to find and coordinate with each other. So whenever you see people really focusing on secrecy and silence and keeping a lid on things, that's a sign that they're trying to keep people, the targets of abuse, from talking to each other. That there's in general, like trying to flatten the hierarchy as much as possible. So that's related to getting rid of unnecessary gatekeepers. Instead of having one person who says, who greenlights all the projects, you have a committee of people who come from a variety of backgrounds and represent a large portion of your community, and have them make decisions instead. There's a whole bunch of things about, like, a thing I've seen over and over again in organizations is people will latch on to a particular concrete piece of power, like the DNS password for your main domain name, or the password for managing your online group chat, or perhaps could it be the bank account, things like that. So there's a bunch of different things. That's just like a few selections from there. But you can look at that and say, hey, let's build an organization and a culture that's not attractive to people who like to abuse their power. And then obviously part of this is having a definition of leadership, which is compatible with people of any gender or people of any race. So not this like very masculine, toxic, white supremacist sort of style of leadership, but this collaborative, there's still somebody making decisions, but you're getting information from multiple people before you do that. You're working together with other people.
So as opposed to having a movement that, holds up the four horsemen as, the superstars of the movement, and these names being repeatedly the ones that are promoted and requested and everything, more of a collaboration.
Yeah, and elevating many people and being very careful and thinking about, why am I elevating this person? I mean, you look at rock stars in your movement or in other movements, and boy, there's usually not a pretty story behind that.
No, yeah, I mean, look at some of our rock stars that are no longer right now, and yeah, we see a lot of that. One of the other things I started doing was, and I didn't get all the way through this, but I was also trying to find the representation that these national orgs give to people at their national conferences. And it's still male heavy, especially CFI's SciCon last year had 24 men and 14 women. But overall, the rest of them, American Atheists, AHA, FFRF, had, more of a balance there. But it's also, we want PhDs a lot in this movement. We want those men who wrote all the books and have the fame and have the following and bring them, because a lot of what they do are conferences, and we know those names are going to sell tickets and bring people to the show. So it's You know, how do you get people to come to your things if you don't have the big names to get them? You know, my goodness, you have to actually do content and worry about that. And I know there is a project right now that is going to be a long time in the making, but it's also seeing who is represented, who is brought on podcasts, who is interviewed in a lot of the pieces. You know, we see these "Where are the women" stories all the time, and they never interview secular women. You know, they never ask the women in the movement where the women are. They go to the men. Hey, you know, Dawkins, how come you're running this thing and there are no women? Because you guys keep writing pieces like this that focus on the men. So we need to really start shifting that, do a cultural shift of that focus. Even watching the Krauss and the Silverman issues go through, and you see people jumping immediately to who can we replace them with, and they list a bunch of men, and just trying to get them to say women is awful. But yeah, sorry, I could go on about that all day.
I mean, I would just question why we need to replace them at all. I mean, we, like, a lot of atheist men in the movement talk a lot about, you know, killing sacred cows. Well, here are your sacred cows that killed themselves.
Right.
I totally agree with Sam, and that's the whole point of the No More Rock Stars, is like, how do you make that happen? You don't have to have rock stars to make your movement run. And one of the things to keep in mind is, like, there's like that individual human desire of, like, oh, it feels so good when I'm next to somebody so famous. When you start to realize the harm that does, I think it gets easier to control that. And when you realize, like, oh, we can all be somewhat famous, it's wonderful. It's such a difference. I want to put in a plug for unconference style organizing of conferences, because there's so much more content. You can watch one of your rock stars give a talk on a video. What you can't do is have a really awesome, meaningful conversation with, like, the people on this panel all day and learn amazing things.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what unconference is?
Oh, yes.
For anybody who doesn't know.
Yeah. Is there, so the idea of a conference is that the attendees of the conference create the content mostly on the day that you are attending, and that there's a lot more of multiple people speaking in each session than a single person giving a lecture. So it's much more suited to an organization or a movement like yours, where there's a broad distribution of knowledge and information and expertise. It's not just a few people who know things and a bunch of people who are desperately trying to learn. It gets more complicated than that. There's a whole bunch of information on Wikipedia and various websites, and the adacamp.org website about how to run one of these things. You still need to do work. There's still organization. There's still preparation. But the content is determined by the people on the day, and that makes it much more relevant and interesting.
And Secular Women Work is kind of a pre-unconference. You know, we had a Kickstarter to totally fund us, and then we ask the supporters what they want to see, who they want to see, what kind of workshops they want, what kind of panels they want, so we can structure it for the people who are coming. So yeah, it's sort of the same thing. We just, you know, get everybody in ahead of time. And it does cut down a lot on the and celebrity. I mean, okay, I'm all about the activism. I will admit that right now. I'm not just in this movement just, you know, to be a part of it, but because of the activism. And celebrity doesn't get activism done. It doesn't get the work done. You know, the people, I do a talk called How to Be a Nobody and Still Get Shit Done, because that's where the work happens with all the nobodies. And there's a panel tomorrow, I believe, that Nicole Harris is doing on the small pieces of activism and all of the unseen stuff. And I everybody should watch that, because that's going to be amazing, because that's what we're made up of. But yeah, I think that's a much more effective way to run a conference, obviously, since I kind of, you know, we patterned ours off of that. Sam, what do you think about conferences and the way that's set up, and unconference versus celebrities, or any other input?
So I love unconferences because I think Skepticon that I went to this past year, the format of that conference is like an unconference, and I remember going to one of the rooms where they'll just let attendees give their own mini conference talk, and I was able to talk to some people, at least for a brief amount of time, about dog culture. And anyone who knows me knows that that's like one of my pet topics. It's not like super serious, but it's it's interesting, and I really love that part right there.
And that's a unique insight, though,
Yeah,
into our culture, and I really love that you pull that out of it.
And that's besides, Skepticon does have other talks that are planned ahead of time. So I think having a hybrid of, the two formats is really useful to, I mean, not just useful, but it's interesting and fun, and it keeps people engaged. There are so many conferences that, I go to and I know everything half the talks are saying because I've, seen them before or something. Or like, just having that little wild card thrown in there, I think is awesome.
It is great because, I mean, it's not like most organizers are going to say, hey, you know what we should really have a talk on? They don't think of it, but yeah. So let's talk about the way to go forward then with this. How we can make change. We've, obviously in the 4 years that Secular Woman has been working, we've made very little change in representation. So what can we do? What can organizations do on a whole? If we're talking to the big national level, we can start there. What can the big groups do? Valerie, you want to start?
Yes. Okay. Sorry, the confusing message. Yeah. So the approach I've been taking with my work lately is to ask men to do more work in this situation. And so I would and this is something that I recommend also in No More Rock Stars is if you are a man yourself and you are in a position of power, influence, or prestige, ask yourself, do I really need to be in this position? Am I blocking a more qualified woman from serving in this position? And so this includes things like being a member of a panel, giving a talk at a conference, serving on the board of an organization, and actually like being the staff and being, for example, executive director or president. Really question yourself, is this the thing that I'm best at, or is it really possible, and often it's the case, that there's someone more qualified out there, in this particular case, who is a woman. So I think that's super important. There's a bunch of, I would also recommend having everyone read the No More Rock Stars blog post. If you search for No More Rock Stars and Valerie Aurora, and perhaps there's some way I can send out information about this later on. But it talks about a lot of different things you can do to your culture to change how women are seen and perceived, and basically making it your own goal as a man to raise up women's voices, put them in the foreground, and then to move yourself to the background and do like boring or less well rewarded work that is currently falling mostly to women.
And I'll put a link on Secular Woman when I put a piece up. I'll put a link to all of your pieces that you've mentioned. Sam, what about you? What do you think the orgs can do?
So one thing the orgs can do is, I mean, and this is something that I guess very, very recently we've seen them, moving on, is, I mean, for one thing, take sexual assault seriously, because even though like we are making some progress on this that was kind of unexpected, I think it can't just be that we stop here, because this is what happens in a lot of cases where we think that we've made some progress and like it just stalls there for a while. And I think in some ways, the entire secular community has been, like, this goes for the entire secular community, where we thought that we made all this progress because we got rid of religion, and then that's why we stalled there. And I mean, obviously, this isn't just about, you know, gender. Any marginalized population could benefit from that specific thing.
And yeah, thank you for pointing that out, because I did want to say that we are focusing on gender on this because it is secular woman, but this does hold true for any marginalized group of people, all of these things. So yeah. And you have a very valid point with the don't stop, don't, you know, keep the momentum going. Don't think that, okay, well, we've gotten rid of 2 people, so how our work here is done. You know, when Shermer is still a thing, you know, the story on Michael Shermer came out a couple of years ago, and he's still, you know, a part of things, and people still support his magazine that hosts, you know, articles on maybe Sandusky was innocent. Yeah, so I mean, yeah, we've got a long way to go. I really do. I do want to take this moment also to say that I am really proud isn't the right word, but, you know, happy, proud, whatever, that the American Atheist Board got the complaints that they got and took them seriously and acted quickly. And I think that is excellent, and I think we need a lot more of that from the boards. In the wake of Krause's story coming out, it took CFI 11, 12 days to make a statement about it and remove him from their honorary board, you know. So we definitely need to keep going. And oh man, yeah, I mean, because it's there's still so much apology and excuse making going on right now, even just in the wake of this one. So yeah, we have a long way to go.
And I do want to include like one little caveat real quick, because a lot of the people who have been, you know, part of this protracted fight against exactly these things, they're women. So when I say, you know, keep going, I don't just mean women, keep going, keep doing exactly the work that you've been doing for like years at this point. I also mean, you know, men, if you haven't started yet, start. And if you started a little bit ago, keep going.
Exactly. And, you know, when you see a woman stand up and say, hey, look, this is what's going on, and she gets pushback, stand with her, support her, you know, help her do the arguments, do the fights. Don't make us do it all on our own. Goodness. So what can individuals do? I mean, other than what we just said of supporting women, what are some other things that Valerie, you had mentioned individuals in leadership positions. What can the average secular movement member do to try and help fix this?
Yeah, so this is what I class under ally skills, which is the sort of like basic everyday in the moment stuff you're just doing when it happens. There's a lot of things that people tend to think, oh, I'll leave that up to the target to do, the person who's the target of whatever bad behavior is happening. And I'm here to say, no, that if you're the person witnessing this, if you see this going on, you should be the person taking action. So I've like a friend of mine used to be told me the story that at her workplace, they had a happy hour every Friday. Every Friday, somebody would make some sort of awful sex joke. And then it got to the point where everyone would just automatically turn their head and look at my friend because she was always the person who spoke up. Instead of taking that burden on themselves and saying, oh, I'm the person who should speak up. This keeps happening. I should go to this person's manager. I should speak up. And one of the important things here is that when you are in a position to be an ally, when you have more privilege, when you're not part of the group that's being attacked, it's far easier for you to stand up and say, hey, we shouldn't do that. That's not cool here. You're much less likely to get attacked. No one's going to say you're just jealous because you're not as famous as that person. That you're, you just have so much more credibility because of that privilege. So, in particular, there's a lot of proactive work you can do to stop things from even happening. So, one of the things you can do is, if you notice that members of certain marginalized groups are constantly getting ignored or not getting credit for what they're doing, you can speak up at the moment that they make a suggestion and say, oh, that sounds great. Let's talk about that some more. if somebody later on says, oh, I have this idea, and it's the same idea as someone who's marginalized already brought up, you could say, that's a great idea. I'm so glad that you're agreeing with so-and-so. So-and-so, do you think that, would you like to comment anymore? That sort of thing. I really want to come back to this idea of being scrupulous about giving credit and just doing it over and over and over again. It'll feel excessive and ridiculous and overdone, the amount of credit you need to give to women and to marginalized people, for people to remember that they did it. So just keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it until people actually complain. So that's my advice. Yeah.
Even in Obama's office, you know, President Obama, Mr. Woke individual, the women noticed that they were being ignored. So they made up a system of when one woman would say it, the other one would say, she had a great idea. Did you guys just hear that? And they would repeat it until people actually listened to the idea.
And I just want to say, like, I love that story. And also, I wish the men had been doing that.
Right.
So my message is, you don't have to be a woman to support a woman.
I mean, they heap us anyway. So they can just, you know, do the heap eating, but then say that was her idea.
Exactly. Yeah. That's how you do it. That's how you support women without being a white knight or taking the spotlight, is you say, I'm using my privilege to support you, and then you give them the mic. And that's the
Sam, you got anything to add to that?
Yep. So this is something that I noticed during my work in volunteering and other stuff with these secular organizations, is that the role of individuals, especially where funding is involved, is a lot bigger than it would be in other movements or other organizations even, because there are some high-level donors who, you know, if one of them divests from a company, that's making or breaking it. Or the org, I guess. I shouldn't say company, even though I guess you technically are. Whatever. So, you know, put your money where your mouth is, especially if you're someone who donates a lot, you know, on a regular basis to whatever org that, you know, this is applicable to. Put your money where your mouth is.
No, that's a very good one. We actually, Secular Woman lost their biggest donor when RDF and CFI merged, because the donor said, you know, can't stand Dawkins. So as soon as that happened, I just left the movement entirely. So that's definitely one way to do it. And we suffered for it, but, you know.
Well, so, I mean, that's another thing you should do also. Reroute it to organizations that are doing the work that you want to see.
Secular Woman's doing it. You know, and that's interesting in this conversation. I've noticed too that we have not gotten established in the minds of people as a national organization yet. Because whenever I hear them talking, it's, oh, okay, and then there's this organization that's not so bad, and then you don't hear Secular Woman come up, and I'm in the background going, hey, what about us? So we do have a question from Greta. Is there a problem of women not wanting to get into the atheist leadership because of movement sexism and other fuckery? Who wants to take that one first?
Yes. So, I mean, I got involved as a student leader. This is just like my experience, I guess. And I mean, it isn't just, you know, the official organizations that are resisted even being like known as an atheist, even though I knew many atheists in my daily life, and like a lot of whom were, you know, people of color. I'm from South Florida. Atheism is not, you know, rare down there. But I mean, when I moved to North Florida, suddenly I had to like find people who really identified as atheists. So suddenly it wasn't just like a generic label. It was more like an affiliation thing with the movement in the US as it currently stands. And that's when I started, you know, being really hesitant, because there were all these other issues that I thought that were, you know, central to my atheism, and I think are central to other people's atheism too, like other social justice issues, that it constantly got pushed back on, constantly. Like in my student group, this was, you know, a regular thing. At one point, someone was like, at one point, my former best friend was like, every time you say white men in our meetings, I can see the white men flinch, and you blah blah blah. I mean, his implication as a white man was that I should stop talking about race and gender, and obviously that wasn't going to happen.
Because the problem's with you, not with
exactly.
them. Right.
I mean, there was a reason I was saying these things. So, you know, absolutely. I eventually did. And, you know, I sometimes, like, I think that I've been fortunate because people have actively, like, sought me for, you know, projects and other things. And I've liked those people enough to agree to do those things. But I, you know, totally recognize that other people have not had that experience at all, because I've seen that happen to other people.
Valerie, you have something?
Yeah, I just want to stick in 2 cents. They're like obviously sexism and general fuckery is going to turn people off, and especially people from marginalized groups. But I want to say that one of the things that I've seen in the research on women in computer science as a career is that people don't leave necessarily because of the harassment. They leave when they no longer are getting recognized for their work. And so the harassment is not fun. It will keep people out. But the thing that seems to make people just quit and drop out after they've become fully involved is that lack of recognition, that lack of credit, that lack of giving people responsibility, but no recognition.
Gotcha. Yeah, that would definitely be an impediment. I mean, if you're doing the work, you know, I mean, it's bad enough having the harassment on top of the work you're doing, but then to not get any recognition for it would be the whipped cream there. But I think also too, we could take a look at how many women have left the movement entirely.
I just want to mention that coincidentally, I mean, this is something I should have mentioned when I first started talking. I actually did leave my student group because of this in the middle of the semester while I was right after I organized a conference for that group, because like I did all of the shit and, you know, it's just, you know, for nothing. Anyway.
No, I get that. And I can totally empathize with it and why you would just, you know, rage quit. But yeah, we could look at a lot of the names that aren't around anymore. You know, Jen McCrate she was just pretty much harassed off the internet and harassed out of the movement. And there are plenty of women's names who go behind that, and some men too, you know, which I can't blame them. But yeah, it's I totally hear where that's coming from, and I totally get it. So
I'll just continue the story about how, like, I got back into it. So I had quit and I didn't do anything with that organization for the rest of the year and a half or so that I was at FSU. But that summer, the summer prior, I'd been asked to speak on a panel at a CFI conference. And then the next summer, someone who was actually a white man told me that I should apply for the internship. So I did that, and that's actually how I got back into it.
That was the panel we were. Oh, sorry.
I just want to say that's such a good example. Like you were recognized, your value was recognized in like a very concrete form, and you actually had some sort of influence. Yeah.
And yes, that was the panel we were on together. That's where I met you.
Yep.
And now look where we are. You know, and that is something. You know, recognizing the work that women do. I remember being on the phone with a group of women who were helping brainstorm up other women who might be good for a conference. And, you know, we are so conditioned to not think of women that way that it's you know, I mean, it's hard for people even to name women scientists. Even when they are one, they don't even think to say me, you know. But then to have someone say, you know, it's a woman scientist that would be good for, you know, speaking. And listening to the one lady just, you know, as we're chatting, talk about this one person that they're friends on Facebook, and they always see her do these great posts, and she's, you know, a scientist and blah, blah, blah. And we're all going, so why isn't her name on the list? And then it takes that, oh, right, yeah, because we just don't even put it together there. And that's a real tough one to kind of overcome.
Another thing that I want to mention real quick that was central to my decision to apply for the internship at all was the fact that it was paid. Like, as I mean, this intersects with like other things, including the fact that women are less likely to have the kinds of income that would allow a person to take an unpaid internship across the country.
Right.
But I would not have even applied if that internship hadn't been paid. And this is really important because a lot of the work that women do behind the scenes of the secular movement is, in fact, unpaid.
Yep.
And the secular movement in particular, when compared to other movements or political groups or organizations, groups of organizations, is very dependent on unpaid labor, and a lot of provided by women.
Exactly.
So, yeah, I just want to put in a plug for paying for people to do work in that. Our theory with the ADA initiative is that we had a group of us had been working to improve open source software for women for over a decade at that point. We're not making much progress. And in the 5 years that we had, a grand total, we averaged 2 to 3 people being paid to do this work. It made an enormous difference. Things are just so much better. So,
right, pay people when you want them to do labor.
Hi, folks. You're almost out of time. You've got about 4 minutes, so if you wanted to wrap things up really quickly, then people will still have time to get over to the next panel, which is the many problems of Steven Pinker, and I'm sure some of our audience might actually be interested in that.
Quite possibly. Thank you, Jason.
No problem.
Sam, I totally agree with you, and that's one of my goals with Secular Woman. It's a dream of mine to get us to the point where we can actually, pay for the work that people do. But I do want to thank you both. This has been an amazing panel. Here I was, thinking, oh my gosh, how are we going to make it last an hour? And Jason's in there going, you guys need to cut it.
I could go on forever.
Well, how about a parting shot? A minute or two.
In closing, these organizations do not have their boards / staffs are entirely male. I think one of them, I know one of them is the SSA, and the boards of SCA and SLS are mostly men.
Okay. My parting shot is give credit scrupulously. It's so important to creating equality.
Awesome. And mine would be support groups like Black Non-Believers, like Secular Woman, support conferences like Secular Women Work. And I'm not just saying this because these are mine, but and not like all mine, but because I'm part of them, but because they're important things. And yeah, the shirt that Jason's wearing, it's a day of awesome shirts. So yeah. So I will put together all of our notes and all of our numbers, and we'll make a nice thing of this and put it up on secularwoman.org. And hopefully, you guys can all join us. secularwoman.org/join. It'll be great. We'll take over the world. It'll be fabulous. And Jason, thank you.
Can I have a second parting shot?
Yes, of course.
Hey.
Just put your money where your mouth is. I've been talking about money this entire panel, it feels like, but it's really, really important, y'all. These orgs will not do anything unless they're like pressured to do it. Money is the easiest way to do it.
Cool.
Thank you all for joining us, and I'll just officially repeat everything that was just said.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank
for
you.
making it stick.
Thanks. Take care.